Okay, so after reading the book we're going to talk about today, it put me in mind of a couple of things historically that have sort of happened in the past. As Canadians, we were pretty shocked, if you were around then, at the result in the Olympics when Ben Johnson won the gold medal. And the day after, it was announced that he'd been caught doping. And it was kind of an unbelievable type of event where how could this have possibly happened? Can we really believe what we're hearing? Then the most famous one was probably Lance Armstrong. You know, all the denials, and personally, myself, I was of the mind of, oh my goodness, you know, it's all the way up to Lance Armstrong's revelations. I was saying, well, he's never felt a test. You know, I believe that he's innocent, etc., etc. And then, bam, you know, the admission of guilt and an unbelievable revelation. And anybody who hasn't seen the Netflix program Icarus about the Russian doping revelations, I would recommend you to go and look at that on Netflix. An Oscar award-winning simple little documentary called Icarus from a guy who's in the cycling world and eventually uncovered a complete set of Russian doping regimes and an incredible revelation. And again, these things are completely shocking. And probably the first ever thing that I came across that was of that ilk, probably not in drugs, but and doping, but a film called All the President's Men. I don't know whether you've ever seen that film. It stars Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford, who are two journalists who come across some information and they end up uncovering Watergate. And eventually this leads to Nixon's impeachment and a completely shocking revelation, putting the facts together and coming out with something that only a few months earlier you couldn't believe was true. To that extent, I guess the role of Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford today is played by Matt Hart, who is going to talk to us a little bit about some of the revelations behind the Nike Oregon project and what went on that led to eventually Alberto Salazar's ban in the book. So we'll look forward to hearing Matt Hart play the role of Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford in All the President's Men, Nike version. Hi, welcome to Running Book Reviews. This is the podcast where we review running books to help you, the listener, decide if you'd like to read the book for yourself. We hope that listening to us chat about running can get you motivated, get you interested in something different about your own running, or inspire you to get on with something within your own running cycle. My name is Alan, and with my co-host Liz, today we're going to talk with author Matt Hart about his new book, Win at All Costs, Inside Nike Running and Its Culture of Deception.
This book is an insight into Nike's secretive running program called the Nike Oregon Project. It details the investigation into head coach Alberto Salazar and a Houston endocrinologist, Dr. Jeffrey Brown, by the USA doping agency, USADA, and their practices. Matt gives us a firsthand insight into the courage of assistant coach Steve Magness and Olympians Kara and Adam Goucher, who broke the silence about practices within the Nike Oregon Project that were causing them serious ethical problems. It also lifts the curtain on the male-dominated exploitation and win at all costs culture within the Nike organization. Divided into 20 chapters, the book charts us through a 12-year process that began in 2007 with a voicemail tip-off from Danny McKay to the eventual 4-year ban of Alberto Salazar and Brown in 2019. At times, it seems almost like a James Bond spy story, but like Lance Armstrong, another Nike affiliate, the stories were all too real. So the author, Matt Hart, is a freelance journalist based in Boulder, Colorado. His work has appeared in the National Geographic and many running, health, and adventure magazines. A previous Microsoft employee, Matt also has also been a professional runner and endurance coach. His original article on violations by the Nike Origin Project was the front page headline of the New York Times in 2017. Welcome, Matt, to the Running Book Reviews podcast, and thank you very much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. Thanks for your interest. I appreciate it.
So now the what we're waiting for all this time, the first, I guess we'll just start by, we have a lot of questions, but how did this book come to be?
Well, I'm a journalist and a runner as well. And so, I write about outdoor adventure and running and skiing and human-powered activities that I'm actually into in my own free time. But journalistic curiosity just sort of led me to this story, really. And I'd reported a little bit here and there for various magazines on the topic of doping in general. And when you swim in those waters, you come across things. And one of the things that I came across was a stolen document, a document stolen from the United States Anti-Doping Agency, USADA, purportedly stolen by the Fancy Bear hacking organization. And I knew that a lot of no news organizations had this, except for the Times of London, which reported on it previously. But it just became a revelation to me. I opened it up and could not believe what I'd found. And essentially the document was USADA's case against Nike and the Nike Origin Project, and Alberto Salazar, the head coach of the team, and Dr. Jeffrey Stewart Brown, a Houston-based endocrinologist. And so that just led me to start reporting on the story as deeply as I could and contacting everyone involved. And then the New York Times assigned me a piece to sort of unpack the document and explain to the readers what it said and why it mattered. And that's really how I became involved. The book grew from that, I guess I should say, because we're talking about the book. But it really grew from that. I started talking to, even after the article came out, I continued to talk to people that were involved. And the Goucher story really struck me as important and not fully explained yet. And so, yeah, that led me on basically more than 3 year journey now of reporting the story and trying to push the book to the finish line, which is coming out October 6th.
So I actually have a question, because the very first, like before the book even starts, there's like a little intro and you talk about this USB key that was handed to you. So is that what contained the document?
Yeah.
Because then we don't hear about it later in the book. So it was sort of missing. I kept wanting to figure out what was on that USB key, but it was not mentioned.
The document was on it, as I hope is clear. Maybe not as clear as I should have put it. But
I guess Liz and I guess we were figuring that maybe you were protecting the identity of someone who'd passed you the key.
Yes.
But it's actually some sort of anonymous hacking organization that effectively did that, did you?
You're both right. Those are both right. Yeah, I don't say the source who sent it to me. Just in deference to them, they didn't want to become entangled. And so, yeah, I do sort of leave it vague. But on the document on the USB drive is the whole USADA case in PFD form, and it's titled "TikTok, TikTok, ... So whoever had titled it knew eventually this is going to come out.
They knew it was a bomb.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the USADA case at that point is not a public document?
No, this was hacked, stolen from their servers, from their mail servers, they think. Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't public. So, the way that the case is supposed to go through the normal rigors is, you're notified, an athlete or a coach is notified of a ban, and then they have a chance to appeal, and it should go on behind the scene. This one broke before I got my hands on the document. A lot of this was already known, and it had kind of broken the media already. So, all that info, a lot of the info came out before the case was tried, which, of course, Alberto was just banned. I think September 30th was banned from sport for 4 years. So that was sort of the conclusion, although there is one final chance for him. Maybe I'm getting ahead of us, but there's a final chance for him to appeal, and that's going to happen in November.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll come to that. That's sort of towards the end, I think. Let's get through the whole story and then let's postulate on what might happen next. I guess, saying the story broke. The story probably broke because people are unburdening themselves after keeping quite a series of stressful information for a long time. I mean, even in the prologue, we see in the book the FBI coming to the door of the Gouchers, and I'm thinking, oh my God, it's starting with the FBI coming to my door. If that was me, and I had the FBI come to my door, I'd be incredibly stressed. But in fact, we see the Gouchers incredibly, to some extent, relieved, because at this point they've been keeping this information. They've been under the burden of this information and these events for 5 years, and they're somewhat, I would say, almost relieved. It would seem that they're being taken seriously.
I would agree with that. That's a good perception there. I feel like every time they told their story, they were a little bit more unburdened with it. It wasn't just them carrying it around. So I think you're right there. Yeah, even sitting down with them, I mean, it's a pretty emotional story for them to tell in general. It was, obviously there was some process of unburdening themselves with all the details. Finally, that was apparent.
You're a journalist, so you're probably a bit dispassionate, but you're also a passionate sports person. So you've got a bit of a you got a double qualification for being involved in this, but you've also got a bit of a dilemma, because you're the surgeon to some extent, dissecting the or trying to conduct the operation. We're also dealing with a member of your family who you're dealing with the thing that you care about in terms of your sport, and trying to behave like a dispassionate journalist and just pick apart the facts. Did you find yourself in a bit of a dilemma, or to be slightly schizophrenic about the process?
To be honest, I love running, of course, and it's a big part of my life. But I'm somewhat of a dispassionate fan of professional running and road running and track and field.
Okay.
At times, I'm very much a fan, depending on the athlete or the venue. But I'm not hook, line, and sinker, starry-eyed. I think actually that's something that helped me report the book. That I think, not to be critical of other journalists or outlets, but you can tell often that they're bordering on sycophancy. They're such fans of the sport that sometimes they can, it will cloud their judgment and maybe make them a bit less objective than they should have been. Now, I realize we're all liable to do that as humans, and no one's truly 100% objective. But yeah, I felt like I had reported on and written about famous athletes before, and at some point you realize they are just like everyone else, and they're normal people with flaws, and sometimes those flaws drive them to do the things they do and become as successful as they have been. But yeah,
I mean, I'm a big fan of Kara Goucher because it goes back to the Olympics in 2012, because Canada didn't send any marathoners to the Olympics. Because they didn't make the Canadian standard. They made the Olympic standard. We had 2 women. And so what ended up happening was I ended up following Cara and Shalane and Desiree Linden that year, because, you guys are our closest neighbors.
Right.
And so I followed those 3 women instead of following the Canadian women, because we didn't have any. And that's how I kind of got to know Kara Goucher. And then then obviously she had such a long career and was always successful, and she was always in like Runner's World and those kinds of things. So I followed her over the years, and I really liked her. But the person that got a lot of publicity along the way was also Mo Farah, because he ended up winning for Great Britain. Winning gold medals in the Olympics, and I think it had been a long time, and he was so dominant in 5,000 and 10,000 for so many years that he was sort of like, he was amazing, and to have him be part of the book was a little disappointing. In the way that I mean, it's not that the book ever said that he did anything wrong, but I didn't realize that he had been with the Nike Oregon Project for so long under Alberto Salazar, because I only really kind of saw that he was part of that only like maybe a couple of years ago. But according to the book, Steve Magness like watched Galen Rupp and Mo Farah win medals at the London 2012 Olympics, and he was sad to see them win medals. Why would that be?
Yeah. Well, Steve had left disgruntled, to say the least. You know, I
Can
think,
imagine.
yeah, similar to Kara, he had just grown over time to be skeptical and worried about Alberto Salazar's tactics. And so, you know, Steve is a scientist at heart, and his integrity is very important to him, but he had this Nike job laid out in front of him and his career laid out in front of him. He could likely take Salazar's position when he retired, and he made really good money, and he was living the Nike life on Nike campus. But slowly but surely, as the book details, he starts to see things that he can't come to terms with, I guess. And again, the burden starts to build on his back too, until he finally releases all this information to USADA. And, you know, he sent an email to them, but that was all spurred by watching Mo and Galen go 1 and 2. You know, Alberto had dug a hole in a book, in a novel, and sent him drugs overseas in Germany, and done a lot of odd things that if you were doing everything on the up and up, you would think you would not bother to cut a hole in a book to hide drugs in. And so that's just one example. But yeah, I think Steve had just grown disillusioned with the program and its head coach, who was, you know, kind of acting as dictator and involved in the whole thing, in charge of the whole thing. And so, yeah, I mean, I think he thought the athletes have sort of compromised their integrity to get these medals, guided by Salazar. You know, I've maintained that I think Salazar betrayed the athletes. You know, they trusted him so wholeheartedly that it's often hard to come to terms with how much maybe blame you should put on the athletes. And none of the athletes on the team have served bans. And some of them were just dabbling in gray area tactics and might look back on that part of their career and deeply regret it. But you have to look to the head of the program for why they would even go that far or do these things. And yeah, I mean, Steve was coming to terms with the fact that he likely got an illegal infusion from Alberto as well, and Dr. Brown. And that was the infusion that ended up being part of the three strikes that he was hit with for the ban, because they were able to prove that infusion was illegal and over the limit. So yeah, I mean, you have to feel for Steve, and he thought his career would be over if he told anyone about this, just because Nike's so powerful and Alberto was the most powerful coach in sport. And so he likewise had a lot at stake, you know, a career and a life. You know, both of his degrees are focused on sports science, and he was really concerned with what might happen. But regardless, you know, the courageous acts of whistleblowers have gotten this case, you know, brought it into the light of day, and, you know, ultimately ended up with the ban.
You kind of feel bad for Galen Rupp, because, you know, in the book it really explains how he was so young, and it was as if he was sort of, I don't know, Salazar just saw talent in him, and even though he had another athlete that was maybe even more talented, Alan Webb, but for some reason he just really took on Galen Rupp almost like a son, and treated him very differently, and to the point where because he was so young when he met Salazar, you feel kind of bad for him when you hear how he would call him to find out what he should eat before his race, like as his pre-race meal.
With respect to Galen Rupp, is it just kind of too bad for Galen, or maybe to the advantage of Galen that he was young and susceptible, or trusted Salazar, versus too bad for Alan Webb? He had too much nous and wasn't susceptible to being influenced by Salazar. Is that why one turned out to have opportunities and one to have less?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think Alan joined the team much later in his career. It was almost a revival for him. Can Alberto help me turn this career around? You know, he had already done everything basically that you would see on a stat sheet or Wikipedia that he's done. That's impressive, and it's quite extensive, obviously. Best American miler of all time, probably. But yeah, he was more of an adult when he joined. I think that definitely has to play a factor. And, it's a double-edged sword, really, because you brought Galen quite literally everything he has in his life right now. He didn't go on to work in, the private sector or do anything outside of athletics. He worked so closely with Alberto that this brought him to, prominence in the sport and to his great effort, I'm sure, and to take nothing away from how hard he trained him. I'm sure of that. But, we don't know the counterfactual what would have happened in his life had he not run into Alberto. But I think that gave him, or he had this built-in conflict with whether he could speak openly and freely about what was happening, or maybe what he thought, Alberto was doing that wasn't quite right. And he still, to this day, hasn't done any meaningful interviews or come out with any substantive details about what happened, other than to deny things that had been accused of him. So, yeah, he's in a tough position, being Nike's prominent runner. And I'm sure as Kara, he came to view Alberto as a father and a father figure. He'd been in his life for so long. They met when he was 15, and they had immediate success and kept carrying that through year after year. So almost an impossible position if you're someone who's loyal to those that help you in your career, as we all hope to be. But as soon as things, go south, I'm sure he felt like he had to pick a side. And he stuck with Nike, and he stuck with Alberto, and has maintained that.
Yeah. I mean, I worked as an executive in the pharmaceutical industry, and one of the things we used to say was the industry's small. So if you ever leave the company you're working for, do not, under any circumstances, burn bridges with them, because they can just pollute the waters for you, and you're finished from a career point of view. So even if you don't like the company you're working for, don't badmouth them, don't talk about them badly. Don't leave with animosity on the table, because your career could be over. And I guess that's what we see with respect to the Nike Oregon project. I must try to get that pronunciation right. The Oregon project and Nike as a company. People being extremely cautious about what they say and do, and very sure of what they say and do. We spoke with who was the guy, Matt Fitzgerald. About we spoke to him about the Hoka NAS Elite project, which he went and worked with for a while. And we said, how much of the performance of the Hoka NAS Elite project is due to Ben Rosario, and how much of it is due to Hoka? Their behavior within the project, how much of it is due to the coach versus the company that is kind of providing all the money and the facilities? And he said it was entirely due to Ben Rosario. And props to Ben, a very positive story, and he got all the credit. So in this scenario, we go, okay, Nike Oregon project, Alberto Salazar. How much is of the bad story that comes out subsequently with the ban is due to Alberto Salazar, and how much is due to Nike? So I'm going to repeat the question, really. I mean, I asked it to Matt, and then I would ask it to you, because it would seem that Nike have questions to answer.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with Ben Rosario's story, though. I'm looking forward to reading Matt's book, Fitzgerald's book. But as I don't think they're on any sort of corporate campus. Is that right?
No, they're not.
Yeah.
No, they're far away.
I think it's fundamentally different. Salazar was a employee of Nike in 2001, and he was sort of bemoaning the lack of talent on the American side as they watched the Boston Marathon. He's watching it in the Boston cafeteria on the Nike campus in Beaverton, Oregon, with Tom Clark, president at Nike. And so it really was spawned on campus, with the idea that Alberto would coach them, and we'd use all of our money, our Nike largesse, to do what we can to close the gap between the East Africans who were dominating the sport, and still do to a large extent, but at least have an effort to level the playing field with them in some way. And the way they devised, it was basically it was basically everything Salazar had been interested in his career. And hopefully that comes through in the book. He was trying experimental techniques, not necessarily illegal, but just things that other athletes hadn't tried or hadn't been using, from day one. And so, it's a lot of his ethos, I think, that came through. But Nike, the more you read about Nike and the deeper I got into reporting this story, and not even just in the running realm, other sports and or how they treat female employees, how many of them have now joined together in a lawsuit because they feel as though just being a woman sets you back professionally at Nike, that there's a glass ceiling. And I'll tell you, some of the stories and quotes I heard that did not make the book, the further I got into this, it just started to amass the tale of the upper echelons at Nike. And it was shocking to me. As you mentioned in my bio, after school, I worked at a large corporation. I worked at Microsoft in Seattle as a software engineer. And coming from that experience, my first taste of this, I was on an assignment with 3 or 4 Nike photographers. Now, these were photographers who made their living off of Nike, basically as freelancers. They weren't Nike employees, but they had shot Tiger Woods and they had been around the block shooting skateboarders or runners or whatever it is for Nike promotional efforts. And they were in a van just talking freely with the journalist, who was just like, oh, I could not believe the stories they were telling about strip clubs and, at the 2016 Olympics, just stories about Trevor Edwards, and he's been let go, and you can, dig into that if you want. And much of that didn't make the book. It was either I couldn't corroborate it, or it had already been reported and was so tangential to what the story I was telling. But just to say, that's where I started. With all these stories, I just couldn't believe it, but it was a male-dominated work environment where women were obviously aggrieved, and very quickly thereafter, they filed a lawsuit, and a lot of this started spilling out into the public, and Trevor Edwards was let go, and he was next in line to be CEO. So that's how high up it went. And I do quote a couple of the one woman from the lawsuit in the book, and just the things that a female employee at Nike would have to endure, to have to hear day to day, just it seemed unbelievable. But the further and more reporting I did, and the further I pulled the string, I just kept hearing more and more of those stories. And and Capriati, John Capriati, is sort of notorious, not just in my book, but elsewhere, for his attitude. Sort of a bullying attitude towards other employees and other brands. So I think that has to have an effect that trickles down. That's your example, as I'm sure you would say, the upper management acts one way. It has to trickle down. It's almost like this is the expectation. How we act and comport ourselves has to trickle down to the other employees. And so that seems to be what's happened here, unfortunately. Yeah.
You did, because you also explained, like, it seems, you made it clear in the book that that Nike has this way of doing things, and they always have, and it's always about finding out how to sell more shoes, and it's like, it seems like they'll pull out all the stops. They don't have any sort of, I'm going to say ethical boundary, I guess, or they would, in the past, they would just, like their manufacturing practices and those kinds of things. Salazar wasn't like one of the CEOs or anything. He was the coach. And it seems like he sort of had this bottomless bag of resources. Like,
kind of untouchable.
Yeah.
In the reporting, it came clear that he has a close relationship with Phil Knight, and that seemed to be, there was a lot of questions around how long Nike rode the Lance Armstrong thing, and I heard from people that, he's still to this day, he's close to Phil Knight, and so that came out in the reporting, and it seemed as though, and this is just my speculation. Well, people outright said it in the book. He's protected by Phil Knight. Phil loves Alberto Salazar. He could do no wrong in his eyes. So those aren't my words, but the reporting pointed to that, and people, told me that. And it seems the same thing was kind of happening with Lance Armstrong. He so idolized and loved the dominant athlete that Phil would become friends with these athletes. Of course, that's probably natural progress, but as soon as something bad happens, he's like, he's now sort of lost his objectivity to decide what's best for the sport and what's best for the brand. And so, and Nike's still, supporting Alberto right now for his final case of arbitration for sport in November. So they're still standing behind him, although, as you probably read or is mentioned in the book, Nike employees, more than 400 of them picketed. Nike was working on the Alberto Salazar building, and as soon as they were set, the day they were going to rededicate it to Alberto, the employees picketed and said, "No, we've had enough. We don't want this building named after him, and we don't want you to reopen it in his honor. We want you to believe the women that are, in lawsuits against you. We want you to believe Mary Kane and her stories, and we want you to do something better about it." And so, just recently, last week, it does seem like the upper management at Nike is listening. They let go of John Capriati, or as it was explained to me, he's been pushed aside. Quite literally the most powerful man in track and field is now being pushed aside, and he's going to become irrelevant at some point. And Craig Masbach, who had been the head of USATF and as well as worked at Nike, there's echoes here of the oil industry and the EPA. An oil executive will then go work for the EPA, and whose best interest does he have in mind here? And that's happened at Nike. Seb Coe was a Nike athlete. Now he's head of IAAF, which has been renamed World Athletics. But there's this cross-pollination which has greatly helped Nike, maybe not be called to account when they should be.
You can see if you look carefully at the book, you hear people talking about the culture, and you just talked to us about Nike's culture towards women, for example, and you can have your opinions and your doubts about that, but if you look at the actual factual evidence that comes out of the book, you see Nike befriending and supporting extensively right up until this day Alberto Salazar, because they've decided he's our guy. And then you see a conversation with another one of its stars that they've fallen in love with, Kara Goucher, where she goes to, in good faith, negotiate her contract when she's pregnant, and she gets told, "We pay you to be a winner, and when you're not a winner, you don't get paid."
Right.
So if you're a listener and you're sitting doubting what's being said, the facts are actually there in front of you if you're able to just pull the threads out of the story. And in terms of the story, it's also clear to me, because I tried to come in as a little bit of a skeptic and say, okay, what am I looking at here and how real is it? It's clear in the story that all of the information that you put in the book is fact checked and reference checked. And you made reference just earlier to having dropped some things out of the book because they couldn't be corroborated. And so what you're left with is not the whole story, it's only the bit of the story that you can be sure that you can prove in a court of law. It would seem to me almost that you've written it with a view of trying to make it lawsuit proof. Are you fearful of the reaction of Nike, or do you just want to be the best possible journalist you could be, or both?
A little bit of both. The fear that was palpable when I was interviewing Nike employees or former Nike employees and former Nike athletes. I'd be a fool not to fully understand that. Danny Mackey, after being threatened by John Capriati, went and bought a gun and he started taking jiu-jitsu, which he's fallen in love with, and he's now quite good at it, as I understand. And so he stopped walking around town with this iPod headphones in because he needed to hear if someone was going to jump him. And so the realities of that, if you actually, I think it'd be hard to come away with, well, first of all, I appreciate taking the skeptical stance, and that's what I tried to do coming into this. And I know that I'll be accused of certain things, but I really, as a journalist, you have to try. Otherwise, your book will just be disregarded you're obviously so biased on one side. But that's not what I tried to do. And I hope that comes across. But, there just was so much evidence and so many stories that were quite frankly unbelievable. So to answer your question, there's the book before mine that came out in the 90s, which made a big splash, was a book called Swoosh. And something, I'll have to find the subtitle, I can't remember, but it was written by a former Nike employee who worked with her sister, who was a journalist. And I talked to her a few times and interviewed her for my book. And I couldn't find any evidence that Nike had sued them or gone after them. And when I got her on the phone, just before I let her go, I was like, I got to ask you, like, did Nike come for you with this book? Because I didn't see any news clippings about or anything, in the microfiche about Nike suing you. And she said, oh yeah, they did. She said, basically, she sat down with her, I think it was a Harper Collins book as well. She sat down with the literary lawyers at Harper Collins, and Phil Knight showed up with 5 lawyers and basically tried to discredit everything she'd written. And her advice to me, which is pretty obvious to journalists, but I appreciated her telling me the story. It's just like, just have all your T's crossed and your I's dotted. And I have my recorded interviews, and, journalistically, these are the basics. But when you start getting into speaking truth to a very powerful company, let's say, it becomes even more important. And of course, these are people's lives, and I, would never want to publish anything that was uncorroborated or, incorrect. And you're always at risk of that. I mean, we see that all the time with nonfiction books, and those that don't like it attack it. And I'm sure I'm going to get my fair share of that, and that's fine. I know what I signed up for, I guess. But, we just did the best work that we could. And I hired my own fact checkers to go over the book, and they're from the New Yorker. And, the New Yorker is widely known as the most rigorous fact checking institution on earth, I think it's fair to say. And I had 3 fact checkers, and my main one, we went above and beyond. I don't know if your readers care about this, but, we don't have to call everyone back and read them the part that they're in, but we did that. And my fact checker did that. In general fact checking, you would call back and say something like, did you say this or something like this? And you wouldn't even read them the direct quote. But we went as far as we could, and we read, the sections to people that were in the book that were willing. I should say my fact checker is quite good, and she got John Capriati on the phone, and he hung up on her in anger. And that's as much as we can do. He was sent emails, and he was sent facts to check in the book, and he ultimately chose not really to participate. I think his lawyer sent us a response just basically saying everything Danny Mackey said is a lie. And so then you have to weigh what to leave in and what to leave out, and it's hard. But I mean, everyone calibrates this throughout their life. Basically, when you're speaking to someone or trying to find out a story, you from birth, I guess, or from the time you can start speaking and listening to others, you start to calibrate this this finely tuned clock on whether you think, are they telling me the truth right now? Is this even plausible? And then the more people you speak to, you start to corroborate it or not. And there were some really astonishing things I would have loved to have put in the book that I just couldn't corroborate, and so they didn't make the book. They're on the cutting room floor, and that's the way it goes.
I think if I could make a statement on that, I would say, okay, I've done a PhD, a doctorate, which took me 3 years of research, and I wrote a number of articles on that. And everything that we say in that, because it's original research, has to be backed up with references and corroborations. And reading your account, it was clear that everything that everybody says in the book and everything that gets done is corroborated in some way, and there's a reference of where it's actually factually stated. This was said in this article or during this interview, etc. So the references are extensive to the extent that I personally would have 100.0% confidence in the book being a statement of truth. So if anybody would care to read it, you should figure that what's said in that book is true. And following on from that, given that what's said in the book is clearly documented and referenced to the extent that that's quite difficult to do, probably all what we're seeing, and this would just be my opinion, what we're seeing is the tip of the iceberg to some extent, because there's a lot more iceberg, but we couldn't make it visible in a way that we can defend ourselves against lawyers. But if we wanted to just come out and make a newsworthy sensationalist thing, could probably have said a lot more. And usually that's the case. There's usually a bit of smoke that's visible and a little bit of fire that's visible, and there's a raging inferno that you can't make visible somewhere else. So I would suspect that's probably the case in this. So if you read the book and you think, well, wow, this seems crazy, it's crazy, but it looks to me to be absolutely 100% true.
If it makes you feel any better, here's my optimistic view, for what it's worth. But I think that now, because of everything else that's come out, Mary Kane and all the other stories. And, I mean, Salazar did get a ban. So I wonder if it would even, would they even do anything? Because like, it's almost as if some of these things are I guess, almost common knowledge. And with all the, the protests of naming the building after Salazar and those kinds of things, you kind of have to wonder, like, wouldn't they just decide to not pursue this because it's already out there, kind of? I don't know. That's my thinking.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, as far as I know right now, they are still going to help him with the case of arbitration for sport, CAS. And yeah, I mean, I don't have any way to explain that. It seems odd to me, but, they got behind him early on when the BBC and ProPublica work was first published. Yeah, I mean, I can't explain it. Alberto must be exceptionally good at explaining away some of the accusations, because Mark Parker, I assume is a very intelligent man, the former CEO, and so there must be a little bit of loyalty there for him. He was a high profile athlete, but ultimately I shouldn't even try to explain why they're still backing him financially and employing him. But he's a confident guy, and he said all along he thinks he's going to get off. And technically in November, when the case is done, he could. It seems unlikely to me. And with the Safe Sport organization also has a case pending against him for the Mary Kane's accusations and some of the things that happened with Kara. And so he could get out of that one, but then he's already entangled in another organization that has the right to ban him from sport. So it's a long road, I think, ahead for him. But
I mean, looking at it factually, it looks like a slam dunk that he won't get off. Factually, it looks very difficult. I mean, there are sometimes more than facts at play. There are mitigating factors or influential factors, I guess.
Yeah.
Is it possible that he could get his ban extended? I heard some stories that if he opens the case in order to get a reduced ban or win an appeal, he also opens the case to an extended ban.
Yeah, that's exactly right. At the end of the book, I mentioned that Travis Tygart, the CEO of USADA, he told me exactly that. He said, for the appeal, we're going to actually try to get him a lifetime ban. And so he does open himself up, like you said, to basically more of a ban and possible like lifetime expulsion from sport. So yeah, that's a possibility. But at this point, it's all or nothing. It seems like for him, in that if he wins the case, the CAS case, he could on some level claim that he's been exonerated, even if he doesn't have a future in coaching. But
just for our readers, and it doesn't really spoil the story, I don't think. Specifically, at the end of the day, what were the things that stuck in terms of the charges?
Yeah, that's actually what was running through my mind when you said, factually, it's a slam dunk, and that's right. He broke. Basically, they proved that he broke 3 rules, and they gave these are the 3 reasons we're banning him from sport. But they're not as egregious as, say, a Lance Armstrong's charges, and they're not as obviously bad to, maybe the layman or the casual fan of professional running. So basically, it was he performed an illegal procedure. They proved he administered or had a hand in an illegal procedure, and that's the injection of Steve Magness of more than 50 milliliters in a 6-hour period. It was likely, I think, that he got more than 1,000 milliliters, actually.
That was the carnitine?
Yeah, L-carnitine in Dr. Brown's office. And again, I mean, that makes me just think of Steve. I mean, by chance, Dr. Brown was Steve's doctor growing up, and Steve was an elite runner in high school, and Dr. Brown had helped him. And interestingly enough, it diagnosed him with a thyroid condition, which became his shtick. But Steve had an extra reason to trust this doctor because he knew him personally from growing up. It was his home physician. And so poor Steve seemingly got wrapped up in this. But so that was one of the things and the second one is trafficking in testosterone. Olympic level coaches are not to have performance enhancing drugs in their backpacks on their person. It's for obvious reasons against the rules. Now there's leeway for coaches who can prove that they need EPO for some condition, or they need testosterone for some condition. And Salazar attempted to do that, but had a lot of trouble proving that he had hypogonadism, which is a condition basically where your testicles stop producing testosterone to the level that would make you a healthy man, basically. Yeah, to the right levels, so you felt healthy and you could get up in the morning and do your thing. So, he had testosterone at times. It seemed he had 2 prescriptions for it, which USADA, never really gets to the bottom of in their report. And there were times where he was seemingly, he administers it to his sons. There's no 2 ways about it. On the Nike campus, he wants to test, and he developed this excuse that's somewhat plausible. It's not compelling to me personally. It might be compelling to someone else or another reader or someone who loved Alberto in the 80s when he was winning races. But, the idea that he was testing it on his sons to see if someone could sabotage one of his athletes. To what ends, I don't know. I can't tell you, but that was the second thing that he was caught to have been doing. And, it's very confusing. Dr. Brown says, I would never prescribe the testosterone for these tests. Yet Dr. Brown was there helping him with the tests. And this is all happening on the Nike campus, where his sons were either playing basketball or running on a treadmill to get a bit of a sweat in a workout to get them into a state where they had maybe just run like at a track meet. And then he would rub testosterone cream on their backs, and they had been pre-tested, and then their urine was tested afterwards to see if it spiked their testosterone, so that their testosterone to epitestosterone ratio was off, which would mean they would fail the test. And so he was either really scared that this was going to happen to one of his athletes, or it's all a guise. And he was trying to figure out how much cream he could use on Galen during a massage or another athlete and get away with it. And so I don't unpack that. I unpack that, but let the reader decide what's going on here. And there's other evidence of Galen, there was records of Galen having testosterone in the past, which would be a violation. But obviously, since USADA didn't pursue that, it was something that they didn't have enough evidence to ban Galen personally for, or it didn't happen.
People said there were errors. Oops, we wrote, I think in the book, oops, I wrote testosterone by mistake.
Right, yes. The idea that a sports scientist would accidentally write testosterone when he meant Testa-Boost, a pill that you get at GNC, it strains credulity. It seems unbelievable. But that's the excuse that Salazar had given, and that doctor has since passed away, so we can't ask him what the annotation meant. But sorry, I got off track. The third thing is obstruction. Travis gave me this fantastic quote when he was talking about it, how Nike basically filled the moat with alligators and pulled up the drawbridge as soon as USADA started investigating them. And so Alberto and his team of Nike lawyers on some level obstructed the case and made it nearly impossible for USADA to proceed. And that's why it took so long. And interestingly, the fact that it took so long sort of forced Steve Magness and Goucher, the whistleblowers, because they weren't seeing any movement on it.
Yeah.
And so they were thinking, well, we might as well go to the media if USADA can do nothing with this. And so it's interesting. And anyway, so they had been shown to have obstructed the case and kind of gone out of their way to, with some tomfoolery and sending emails, thousands of emails the night before they're supposed to review, have them already reviewed. Just small things, but ultimately, so what my editor actually challenged me on this, like, doesn't everyone do this? And Travis basically said, this is obstruction to a level we've never seen, not with the Lance Armstrong case, not with any other case we've worked on. And so it had to have been egregious if he's saying that. And of course, it's one of the 3 things that they banned Salazar and Dr. Brown for. So
yeah, I guess there had to be something if they were going to those lengths to not have them asking around and getting information.
Yeah. Alberto sort of gathered the athletes around and said, you're going to use our athlete, or you're going to use our lawyers, and so, that might seem logical if you're all on the same team, but what it meant was, athletes weren't talking to USADA. They were basically telling them they wouldn't do interviews and couldn't do interviews, and no, you can't look at my medical records. The things that if you were a clean athlete, you'd say, yep, absolutely, look at my medical records. I'll talk to you this afternoon. No problem. Let's clear this up. But they, like Travis said, they pulled up the drawbridge and they started making it very difficult for USADA to proceed. And it took a long time to get this case to the finish line because of that.
So there's also there's almost like a second team and like a second group. Like there's the because there's a Nike Oregon project, but there's also the Bowerman Track Club.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I understand, they're also part of Nike. Like, how is it that, they're never, it seems like they're doing everything right. They're training hard and they're not trying to do things like figure out how to get an edge by infusing a substance. And you didn't talk about them very much in the book, but how do they fit into the whole Nike ecosystem?
Yeah. I mean, I do talk about them in the book in that, Jerry Schumacher was courted. So Alberto had a heart attack in 2007, went down on the Nike campus, ended up with a pacemaker in his chest. And for a while it was touch and go. They didn't know if he was going to come back to full powers or, if he could handle the rigors of coaching athletes and running around the track and the travel. And I'm sure it's quite a stressful job. So they courted Jerry Schumacher to come and replace him and be an assistant coach. And it's in the book as far as that and how they came together and then quickly came apart. Jerry, who I talked to was, he's a really smart guy and a really kind guy. And I could tell he had trouble, I don't know how to put this, but being mean to and telling me the full extent of what happened between him and Alberto. And he felt sorry for Alberto on some level, but then corroborated everything that I had heard already. And he just grew uncomfortable with what Alberto was doing. He was on the Nike campus when he was testing testosterone on his sons. And this is a story that hasn't come out, but the two of them ran into each other on campus. And Salazar said, "Jerry, you got to come check out the tests we're running on testosterone. You've got to come be a part of this." And Jerry, very kindly said, "Thank you, Alberto, but I'm not interested," and walked away shaking his head and wondering, what on earth are you doing? This is an unambiguously illegal drug that you shouldn't even have in your pocket, let alone be rubbing on fellow Nike employees and your sons. His sons who presumably have no medical need for the drug. I mean, it just seems absurd. Anyway, so Jerry, because he's an excellent coach and a kind human being, Nike still wanted to keep him around even though he didn't want to work with Alberto. So they gave him the Bowerman Track Club as his team. He started a team and then they gradually named it that. And so what happened from various reports on both sides is that the Nike Oregon Project athletes, did not like the Bowerman Track Club team athletes. And, they wouldn't train together on the same, the Michael Johnson track there on Nike campus. They would not train together at the same time on Nike campus, which I found interesting. They avoided each other. It was even to the extent where the Schumacher athletes didn't hang out with the Nike Oregon Project athletes, socially even, or at parties, or, casually around campus. And so Jerry had a run-in with a lot of that. There was a lot of hype for a while around Dr. Brown being such a brilliant doctor, and they pressured Jerry Schumacher into using him on his athletes. And what happened was these athletes all came back with the same diagnosis for the same conditions they had never been previously diagnosed with, and then a list of prescriptions that they were supposed to get on. And guess what? It was the same drugs. It was thyroid stimulating hormone, it was albuterol and prednisone. It was drugs that Alberto's athletes had been rumored to be on, or Jerry knew most of them were on them. And so he said to the athletes when they came back from Houston in their appointments with Dr. Brown, well, and this is in the book, of course, he says, I want each one of you to go see a doctor outside of the Nike ecosystem, and get a second opinion. And I would venture to guess that most of those athletes are no longer on those drugs and probably didn't fill their prescriptions. But, that's what he was working with. He got it was almost a tractor beam that he got pulled into to work with Dr. Brown, this heralded doctor. And all of Jerry's spidey senses were tingling that he should not be doing this, and this doesn't sound right, and how is it that they all have the same conditions? He just found it impossible to believe. And to his credit, he didn't like it, and he made sure to fix it. And he's still there, and he's still coaching impressive athletes who hopefully haven't done anything gray area or illegal. So that's the environment he came into, and that's what he worked through. And a lot of his athletes on the other end, and I quote one of them at the end of the book, basically saying, we knew what we were doing. We were doing things the right way, and so they were actually relieved to see Alberto and the Oregon Project athletes, come under scrutiny, and at least Alberto be banned for what he had been up to. So I don't think there's any love lost between those two groups. And Alberto had attacked Jerry Schumacher at one of the races verbally, and some people had told me that he threw a punch, but when I talked to Jerry, Jerry said he didn't remember him throwing a punch, so that didn't make the book. But yeah, there was animosity, and it just grew. They thought Jerry's team was working against Galen Rupp in the races, systematically boxing him in or pressuring him to the outside, that kind of stuff. Little things that Salazar thought he saw. He was deeply paranoid in some ways, and Jerry was like, my athletes are just trying to win the races, they're not actively against anyone. But there was so much animosity there that Alberto kind of exploded on Lopez Lemong at one point, and Jerry then got involved to protect his own athlete. And so some of these stories, as I say them, I can't even really believe that. Is this really what happened? Is this really how a Nike man comports himself at a race? But
what about Kara? Because I know that, back when I was following Kara and Shalane, I mean, they're both wearing Nike uniforms, and they looked like they were good friends. So was there ever any, did Kara ever think to go train with the Bowerman Club?
Yeah, that's near the end of the book. Kara, after she leaves Alberto, after Daegu, she shops herself around with her agent and tries to reach out to different coaches. And Jerry Schumacher comes to the house. And when he leaves, her and Adam look at each other. Adam's long retired, but kind of helping her manage her career. And they look at each other and they say, that's the guy. Jerry Schumacher's the guy. We're going to go with him. So she does train with Jerry on the Nike campus while she's still there. And she trains with Shalane. And initially, can't keep up with Shalane. She kind of joked about that to me. Shalane was so far ahead of her at the time, and Kara had been working through some injuries too. So she had a short-lived stint with Jerry, and it seems like they all left it pretty good. And Shalane's, an awesome ambassador for the sport and an amazing champion, and treated Kara well. They became pretty close when they trained together. So I know they're still fans of each other on some level.
Kara seemed to get in originally with Salazar and the Nike Oregon project, almost as an adjunct to Adam Goucher, who was the sort of star originally. But by the end of the relationship, we see Adam hatred is probably not too strong a word. See his hatred for Salazar. What happened there? That looks like a complete turnaround.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it happened over time. Obviously, they had seen, Kara had gone closer and closer to Alberto. As her career was improving, she became more of a priority. And Adam became less of a priority. Unfortunately, that's just the reality of being a professional athlete. And so at one of his races, he and Alberto had gotten into a terrible argument about tactics and what Alberto wanted him to do, and it didn't work out, and Adam was angry. And so they had clashes like that at times. And that for a while Galen was in college, he kept seeing Alberto and Nike pay for Galen to do things. And to Adam, he how do I explain Adam? He's a bit binary in that, look, if you're doing it right, you're on the good side. And if I see you doing something wrong, he's quick to put his foot down and stand up for himself, basically. He doesn't mess around. And so I only know him now, but I could imagine back then, maybe he was a little softer with it, but he every now and then would get entangled with Salazar and the way he was doing things. And, Galen was supposed to be in college and not a paid professional athlete, and you'd see him buy Galen's groceries, for instance, in Park City or whatever, and Adam would make a snide remark like, oh, that's not illegal. And that would anger Alberto, and they'd argue about it. And of course, Adam was trying to help guide Kara's career as she was taking off, and often Salazar and Darren Treasure, the sports psychologist, they were just at odds. Adam didn't think she needed to do certain things that they did. And then, he realized at some point, and this is one of the moments where I realized, oh, this is a book. Adam told me in the first interview, he was telling me, basically, we can't explain this to you in one interview, and it's going to take a long time to unpack this, but just know at some point, Alberto and Darren Treasure were trying to break up our marriage, he said to me. And I was just beside myself. I couldn't believe and had no idea really what he was talking about. But that's what they think they were trying to do. Darren, the sports psychologist at Nike, was sort of undermining Adam and questioning Kara in their sessions about whether do you think Adam is the right man for you? You might need someone else more like this or that. And, it wasn't until she had some remove and then they started talking about it as a couple afterwards, I think, that they realized, oh, they were undermining our marriage. And they'd been doing this for a long time and they hadn't put the pieces together. And again, this sounds like these stories are hard to believe that this would happen on the Nike campus with the top program in the world. I mean, maybe at your local, maybe a much less prestigious program, but you just can't believe it's happening. And so, I mean, to answer your question, over time, they really just grew apart. And then in Daegu, Alberto, on the way there, I don't know if you remember that part in the book, but, he sort of made an unwanted sexual advance, and it was just so disturbing to her that, Adam could tell something was wrong, and she was crying a lot and terribly upset. And then she started to see things differently. This was like taking the red pill, I think, as they say, from the Matrix.
Mm-hmm.
But like she could now see that, oh, over there before Galen's race, he's coaching him so that he can get an IV. And he handed me a pill before the race, and I didn't see where it came from, but he claims it's vitamin B12. Now, that's not a performance-enhancing drug you take right before the race. And so she started to question, all of a sudden, she started to now question this. Like, well, what was that pill you gave me? And where did it come from? And it didn't look like B12 because she'd taken B12 before. And so, they came together in all honesty later when they got home and started discussing all the things they'd seen that didn't jibe. And, then there was an awkward discussion about what just happened on the plane. And I should say that revelation in the book, Adam's vitriol and anger throughout this, for much of my reporting, seemed a little bit unwarranted or over the top to me. And I'm a married man, and, Salazar's advances to Kara and his comments about her breasts constantly, I now get it. And I hope that comes through in the book. Like, oh, here's the reason Adam would probably try to strangle Salazar if they were to be put in the same room together. He actually has a valid reason. It's not overblown, and it's not, it seemed a little over the top until I understood the whole story. And hopefully that comes through in the book. They just at some point began working against each other to such a degree, and all the way till the Gouchers pushing and pushing and pushing to see if they could unearth this thing and get him a ban. And, of course, that eventually happened.
Yeah, I do remember that part. I remember being actually kind of shocked because all along it was sort of like Kara looked up to him and he was like a father. And this was kind of the messaging also, that I read before I read the book. So, yeah, I was very surprised by that.
Yeah.
It seems to me though, in the project with the psychologist, Mr. Treasure, the endocrinologist, Dr. Brown, and Salazar, seemed to be a lack of somewhere checks and balances. Talk about giving pills and not knowing where they came from.
Mm-hmm.
We hear about Salazar giving medical instructions, which is in no way qualified, or drugs, which is in no way qualified to administer.
Right.
Are all the elite groups like this, where there's basically an ad hocery going on? We just go and get someone and we put them together, and whoever's the biggest character sort of takes control. And shouldn't there be some better formalized checks and balances in terms of people verifying each other?
You mean as far as substances, or just in
as far
general?
as administrative behavior within the group?
Yeah.
A company would have a board of directors. We as coaches of junior kids, we coach little kiddies.
Mm-hmm.
We have a thing called rule of two. You never take one child alone with yourself ever, anywhere.
Right.
It's just an administrative control.
Yeah.
So there are checks and balances. There are some absolute things that you have to have in place. It seemed to me that Salazar was just basically in control and doing whatever he wanted, and there was no comebacks ever.
Yeah, I mean, the difference there might be underage kids and adults, and
now it's just an example to
illustrate
that there are checks and balances in all scenarios.
Yeah, and coaching in sports science, I think the difference between sports science and coaching is, the coaches are trying to apply whether it's substances or procedures that, haven't been through rigorous tests necessarily, as quickly as they can to gain an advantage almost.
Yeah.
That's obvious.
They're on the bleeding edge of whatever's just about to come out.
Right. The whole L-carnitine thing was, let's get it. Nike and Salazar were talking about buying the company so they could they could basically not distribute it to the rest of the world.
Yeah, have
They could keep the
exclusivity.
secret to themselves and have only their athletes benefit from L-carnitine if it works. And, as the book details, Steve Magness's test showed that there's a possibility that this really works, because he was all of a sudden running with three of the best athletes on earth, and he was a coach, a well-trained coach. And Steve was no slouch. He was just over 4-minute miler in high school. So he was an elite athlete at one point, but not at that point. He was still a good athlete. And so, yeah, I don't know how to answer that question. One would think there'd be more checks and balances from the Nike corporate world, but they really seem to have just given him free reign, and they check in as far as, obviously results really mattered to them. And that's, the win at all costs ethos kind of became part of the problem, that we're going to do whatever it takes. So, yeah, I think the complicating issue of Phil Knight, really admiring Alberto, and at least that's what my reporting told me, and the fact that he could kind of do no wrong, and he had a huge budget. The program was an abject failure for a decade. Like, you'd be hard pressed to mention anything in the first 10 years of the program that was on the caliber that they'd hoped for. And so, yeah, maybe he was feeling more pressure as the program became aged. And I don't know, but there should be some sort of better checks and balances. Even just having more women on staff. We may get to this and it's obvious, but Shalane Flanagan's now coaching with Jerry Schumacher, and that couldn't be a better move for Nike and that team. Female athletes need a female coach that they can talk to who's been through it. And you're just not going to get that from Alberto Salazar, who's going to comment on your weight before he lets you finish your sentence, it seems. And so, yeah, I think they are making changes to that, and having female staff is important, and especially with the female athletes. But yeah, it does seem, even with John Capriati, there was impunity there. They could act with impunity. There didn't seem to be much, even after things came out in the news, you would think there would be some repercussions, but they're powerful men. Someone I interviewed about the lawsuit, the women they're bringing against Nike, basically said these guys, they're really well paid. And she said they start to see themselves as God's gift to earth, in Portland at least, because they're wildly wealthy, and there's few checks and balances on them at work, and they work with the best athletes in the world. LeBron James is walking through campus one day, and so I hope that's changing. It does seem like there's something changing at Nike.
So you think that that this time there'll be change? Because now it's been your book kind of ends at the end of 2019, sort of with the Salazar ban, but now we hear about the things that they're trying to change, like for women in their contracts, for them to get paid and all that kind of stuff. So do you think that they're just trying to sort of lay low so they don't get too much bad publicity, and they're going to continue the way they have, kind of like with Lance Armstrong? Because Lance Armstrong, obviously, all that bad publicity, that didn't really change anything. But this time it seems like maybe there's a chance that they're going to try to change. Do you think that they would? Or
I'm hopeful that they will. I try to remain less an activist and just stay a journalist who reports on what's happened or what's happening. So I know I'm sort of in unfamiliar waters here, and I wouldn't want to prescribe them anything, but I should say it does certainly seem like, the cynic in me and some of the athletes who are now so burned and cynical of Nike, they see these as just PR moves, something to placate the masses. They did change the female contracts, but if you talk to Kara about it, she'll point out exactly why it was just talk. It's not substantive. It doesn't change what needs to be changed in the contracts, but they did get a news blurb, in the Oregonian, that they changed the contracts. And for some people that's enough. But like I said, with John Capriati and Craig Masbach and that whole gang and Trevor Edwards being sort of, unceremoniously ushered out of the company, one would hope, with more female leadership and just an awareness, as antagonistic as they were, or unhappy as they were with the book. Hopefully, my book can, we have to talk about the issues before we can fix them, and maybe someone on the Nike campus will read the book. I hope, and then they can act. It has seemed like their modus operandi since the 90s, when they were being accused of sweatshop indignities, that they've just stuck their head in the sand and kept plowing it forward to make money, and whatever happens happens. And let's be honest, that has worked for them. Their stock just hit an all-time high, I think, a couple of days ago. And so there has been no real monetary repercussions to the company. I fully admit that, because it's so obvious. Even if they lose a little bit in public opinion, yeah, I mean, that's a bit disheartening to say out loud like that.
I mean, their written culture, if you go on their websites, their written culture is that they're happy to get in there and fight dirty if they get the winning result.
Mm-hmm.
So it would seem that their corporate culture is a little bit that, sort of proud to be the macho guy in the ring,
yeah,
scrapping it out,
yeah,
and giving everything from every direction in order to get the result, i.e., win at all costs.
Yeah, I mean, the Nike principles early on were, just as you said, it won't be pretty and fight the law, and those were handed out by Phil Knight from day one at Nike.
Do they have more association with rule breakers than other companies, than other sports companies, or is it just that they're higher profile and they've got more money, they're dealing with more issues, and hence more stories come out? I mean, we see Lance Armstrong, Justin Gatlin, I think, was associated with Nike, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm. He still is. Yeah.
Marion Jones was a Nike athlete. Lance Armstrong, obviously, the famous one.
Yeah.
You see the Salazar thing. I mean, it's not a one-off, is it?
No, it's definitely not a one-off. There's a cultural problem, I think, from the top there. That's my personal opinion, but it's not unique to them necessarily. I think as you get closer to the top of athletics, and the previous women's gold medal winner was caught doping, and she's not a Nike athlete. This is happening in the sport. The sport's fundamentally changed. Now that you can make a great living as a runner,
yeah, more
money in the sport, the more likely athletes are to swim in the gray waters or outright cheat when they get an opportunity to. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is. So I don't think it's unique to them. I mean, that's obvious, because all sorts of athletes from other sponsors get caught and are banned. But yeah, it seemed to thrive a little bit in the Nike ecosystem and with the Nike ethos from the top down.
I mean, it's a personal observation, but I don't know, five or more plus years ago, I was a big fan of the Tour de France, and then I found out one year that the person who won was doping, the person who was second was doping, and the person who was third was doping. I think it went all the way down to seventh.
Yeah,
I felt so betrayed, having watched this 3-week process avidly and invested so much of my time and my interest in it, that I decided that I would just stop. I would have nothing to do with the cycling tour. I wouldn't watch it. I wouldn't watch the ads. I wouldn't watch it on TV. I would tell all my friends not to watch it, because I figured that the only way to deal with the issue as a person, just myself, was to try to devalue the sport that had betrayed the ethos of what I wanted the sport to be.
Mm-hmm.
And to that extent, I heard Karagachis say, if you're buying Nike shoes, you're funding Salazar's appeal, because Nike are backing Salazar. So be aware of what you're doing.
Yeah.
I heard that and I went, I kind of like their shoes. and then I realized, once I'd read your book, that's exactly what Nike are banking on. They're going, yeah, that's fine, but they'll like our shoes.
Yeah.
And they'll buy our shoes. And what's more, we'll put a premium on our shoes because we've got this advantage or whatever. And so I've sort of decided that I need to stop doing that. As an individual, instead of going, okay, I read the book and I believe it or I don't believe it, as an individual, okay, I believe that. And what can I do as an individual? Well, I can stop buying their shoes. And I could tell all my friends in my running club that I'm not going to buy their shoes.
Which he has done, by the way. He has done that.
Yeah, and by the way, the Saucony Endorphin Pros are not giving me any sponsorship, but I'm currently wearing those, and the Saucony are signatories to the Clean Sport Collective, actual signatories to that. So I've switched over to that.
And he has convinced like at least 10 people in the club to buy Saucony Endorphin Pros instead of Nike shoes.
So that's, on a personal, I believe every word in your book. It's clearly believable, and it's probably only this small part of the story. And I think as an individual, that's what I can do about it. So I'm doing it. And then I'm keeping my antenna up to listen for Nike changing, because I think forgiveness is also something that we owe everybody. Everybody can change. And I'm keeping my antenna up and waiting for that. But I'm still waiting. I actually send messages out to 4 Nike executives by various social media, including people who left their email address and said, please contact me. I'm the Nike liaison or whatever for women's sport. And I've had no replies. So follow up, 0 replies. So, I can read their website where they go through platitudes about what they're up to. But when you actually try to engage with them, you get nothing. You're a journalist, so you obviously worked out how to get in touch with people and speak with them. But from a Joe Public point of view, they seem to be still very silent and secretive. They're saying nothing and hoping people will continue to buy their shoes and that they won't change.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, you said a whole lot there that is so interesting to me. I had the same experience, I should say, with Lance Armstrong, in the early days of me just being a writer, but I considered myself more of an athlete then and loved riding my bike and loved getting together with friends to watch those races. And a couple of years in, I had read so much about the sport that I realized before the general public did. I mean, if you read deep enough, you could figure out what was going on, and it wasn't good. So that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, Lance sort of spurred me into this career on some level. He's been interesting to deal with as a journalist since then, but yeah, I mean, all you can do is express your distaste with your dollar bills and who you give them to and what products you buy. So, I mean, that sounds like a totally reasonable way to go. Yeah, I mean, one hopes, like you said, if you put your antenna out, they will start to change. And I will say again that the recent dispatch of John Capriati and the team around him, that's a good thing, and that should at least put some people in some powerful positions that aren't him, some new blood that maybe have thought about this and or read some of their own news clippings and have a better idea what's going on. So, I mean, I'm hopeful of that too. I should say, and I like to say, because it's absolutely true that, companies and people are complicated and nuanced, and there are hundreds, thousands of good people that work at Nike. And many of them, I think, feel muffled right now. Many of them picketed the campus when they tried to reopen Alberto Salazar's building once again after he was banned. And so I know Nike's not all bad. I mean, I grew up idolizing them. Hopefully the book shows a bit of both sides. I mean, obviously the incidents where they don't look so great are obviously working against the interest of clean sport, are more salacious and more interesting. I did try to engage them to get more info on even just charitable organizations that they help, but they didn't want to engage, and that's been a very useful and profitable tactic for them. Like I said, all the way back to the sweatshop days in the 90s when Harper's magazine reported on that, they basically were just zip-lipped about it all. We don't need to comment, and the stock just keeps doing its thing. And so that's worked for them, and that's definitely what they did with me. I don't need to go into all this, but they were responsive enough. I know they know what I was doing. And then I flew to campus and spent a week going on campus, knocking on doors. So they knew what I was doing and they were aware of me. And, they just were incapable of addressing it at the time. And hopefully that's changing. But like I say, they're a nuanced company and there's great people there, I'm sure. But those people need to voice their opinions and they need to start changing the corporate culture that's now spilling out into the newspaper so often. I can't imagine. It did seem like most of the employees there, and I know this experience from working at Microsoft. I had gotten to Microsoft right after they tried to break the company up, and Bill Gates was sequestered and interviewed on national TV, and they were trying to the antitrust. And so you get into your silo. You're a hard worker. You got a life outside of work, and you might not necessarily even realize Nike was in the news again. And so you have to give him that benefit of the doubt. And of course, Salazar too deserves that. He's a nuanced human being, and he's not an evil incarnate. He is a human with flaws like I have, like we all have.
Yeah, that I think that came across because, it really started, like you really explained how he started to, he was looking into supplements, which supplements are completely legal. And it's like the L-carnitine thing. It's like, L-carnitine is just an amino acid. Like anyone can go buy it at the store. It's just a pill. It's a natural supplement, but it's just that then it seems like slowly he just crossed over, and it became a little bit illegal, and then I guess with testosterone a lot, like really illegal.
I'm just laughing at your little bit illegal. Oh, I'm sorry, I was only a little bit of illegal.
Well, it's like the people
I'm only half pregnant.
Well, that's what got him in the end, right? The little bit of illegal ended up getting him the 4-year ban. And he crept up to the line. I think you're right. And he was in the gray waters, like, what am I doing here? And, he just pushed it too far. Yeah, it happened slowly, I'm sure. But
and Nike, sorry, I just gonna add, Nike's not all bad either, because, they do, those Nike shoes that they came out with, they're pretty amazing, and it's kind of changed running shoes. Like now all the companies have carbon plated P-backs shoes,
and they pump a lot of money into the sport.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what I try to remember to tell this little anecdote every time. So early in my reporting, I was starting at the beginning of Nike, and I had spent some time with Pat Tyson, who's a prominent college coach now, but was Steve Prefontaine's roommate at the University of Oregon, and he's been around the block with Nike. And, he was adamant that I understand before I got started on this project that without Nike, a lot of these track meets would not exist, and the sport of running might not even have a professional level. He was just at square one, Matt. You need to understand the amount of money that Nike puts into the sport is probably not gotten back in revenue. They truly love the sport, and they probably put more in than they get back. Now, that's impossible math to do without some real insight into the company. I know they make, in their own reports in 2019, I think they made $4.6 billion from the running category alone. Now, so the idea that maybe they put more than that into it, I don't know. I can't say if that's true, but that was Pat's impression. And he makes a valid point. The Diamond League races and some of the prominent track meets, without Nike's sponsorship, just wouldn't happen. Now, that doesn't give you free reign to run buckshot over the whole sport, but point taken, without Nike, we wouldn't know Prefontaine. We wouldn't have these amazing sporting moments that we come together around our TVs to watch during the Olympics or the World Championships. And so, yeah, a nuanced company, and I'm sure they have so many great people there that are just chomping at the bit to take over the reins and hopefully fix things. If Nike were to align itself with clean sport, the things that, I truly think they could basically abolish doping in running if they marshaled all their resources towards every aspect of clean sport, and even testing their athletes so frequently that there's no question a Nike athlete is cheating. They can afford to do all of that, or not rehiring Justin Gatlin after he serves a ban for doping. It just, some of those moves don't make sense, but they do make sense if you have this win at all costs ethos. Well, Justin is the only one capable of beating Usain Bolt, which we saw at the end of Usain Bolt's career. And so they have to rehire him because Usain Bolt's wearing Puma. Nike needs to win. And if they don't rehire Justin Gatlin, they have no chance. And so, you can see where the profit and the ego of the company sort of pushes them to do certain things that you or I probably wouldn't do, like rehire a guy who served a ban. He can go somewhere else, I think. It's just those questionable decisions that they make consistently that hopefully fresh blood in the upper ranks and in the coaching teams will allow them to just start making slightly better decisions. But like I said, I would hope at some point maybe they came out and signed the Clean Sport Collective and really aligned themselves against doping. And it would be astonishing, I think, to see what they could do, what they could accomplish.
And there are so many people sitting, enthusiasts or athletes themselves, sitting in the wings waiting for that to happen, and who would immediately forgive the sins of the past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you're right.
Other than the fact that, Salazar is a nuanced person, and Nike, has their good sides and their bad sides. Is there anything else that you wanted readers to get out of the book?
No, I mean, if they take those away, I mean, there's the whole idea of this, being a cautionary tale. And, I thought about younger athletes and, talented high school athletes at times when I was writing it, and I just hope that they're cautious and concerned with where they draw the line, where their gray area starts. Just make sure it's on, this side of doing the right thing, and you'll be fine. But I mean, just coming into the sport with your eyes wide open, that often these big brands treat the athletes as commodities. And if you know that going in, I think you can protect yourself a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
But as Kara said at some point in the book, she says, I thought I was family. I loved these people, and I thought that they considered me family too. And that obviously wasn't the case in the end. But it's an interesting tale, but a cautionary tale for young athletes for sure.
Effectively, is this a finished article for you, or is this ongoing? Is this an unfinished tale, Matt? Can we look forward to maybe, I don't know, so a New York Times article following the November result of the appeal, or an ongoing story? Have you got anything in mind?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not currently. 3 years on this has kind of exhausted my
I can imagine.
my wealth a little bit. I mean, I've had a break. How long books need to get. The book was done in May, easily done in May, and so I have had a break. And I continue to talk to sources and athletes about this. There is more to the story at the end. In the acknowledgments, I quote journalist Stephen Kinzer, who says, everything in this book is true, but not everything that is true is in this book. And I think Mary Kane, her story is probably going to spill out at some point, whether it's her own book. Yeah, there's more to this. There's a lot of athletes, that didn't talk, and maybe they didn't have anything to say, or, they would have just corroborated the stories that had happened. But I might continue. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. It seemed to be cresting and breaking all around me when I was reporting it, and now it's definitely calmed down. But there'll be inevitably a wave around the November case.
Yeah, I wonder if part of it is also because, with COVID-19, track and field and racing in general has kind of been
curtailed.
Yeah, it's been all canceled. So maybe that's why the other stories around it are also not so
newsworthy.
Yeah.
It's interesting times for running.
So what are you working on now? This book is about to launch. So do you have anything you'd like to tell us with respect to what you're up to, or what we should watch out for?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm working on a couple things. I don't know if I'm working on a story for the New Yorker, and it's not specific to running, but it's in the coaching realm. I'm also working on another book proposal. And so, I mean, I don't know what to say about it quite yet. I don't have the elevator pitch. I had, a middling career in ultra running. And I know you had Finn on with the Rise of the Ultra Runners. I listened to that.
Yeah.
But maybe something with a little memoir, a little history, and some ultra running, and a big ultra running story. So that's what I'm thinking at the moment. But we'll see. It hasn't totally. I haven't totally worked it out yet, as you know, these things are.
Well, if you do, you know where you can pitch it.
Right here.
Running book reviews.
Yeah.
Yeah, and ultra running has a lot of stories from what we've heard.
A lot of odd happenings and crazy adventures for sure.
It's a pretty serious book, I guess I should say, but quite a brilliant insight into what really happened in the NOP, the Nike Oregon Project, and I guess the pressures on humans, various players that we see in the story, humans caught up in obsessive pursuits, whether they be obsessive pursuits of business goals from Nike executives, or there be obsessive pursuits of athletic goals in terms of coaches and athletes. I would also say that, and I've said this earlier, every quote and event has a reference to it, which makes it irrefutably believable in terms of the facts in the book. It's impossible to deny. And the book looks very to be very carefully written so as not to leave possibilities for legal challenge, and leaves, I think, the reader to make their own interpretations. It gives the facts and you can draw your conclusions to some extent. And I find it very easy to draw my own conclusions. Would expect that everyone else can draw similar conclusions. The book basically reinforced my view regarding Nike. I'd seen the New York Times article and video on Mary Cain. I'd heard about practices with respect to slave labor, mistreatment of women, and kind of brushed all that under the carpet because, wow, the shoes are really nice and the t-shirt looks sexy. Well, it's greatly reduced, reading the book has greatly reduced my willingness, in fact, to the point of being unwilling to support their brand at this point in time. So I would thank you for opening my eyes fully on that issue with your book, Matt.
Well, I mean, I have to also say thank you for opening our eyes to Nike as a company. And I like that you gave the nuance, and you did also say that they're very good in certain things, like research, like their shoes that they came out with, that they put money into the sport. So they're not all bad, but the book itself, I found it was, I mean, there was a lot of information in it and all of it was referenced. It was very credible, but I was particularly impressed about how you put it all into like a story format. So it seemed very chronological. It was in a way very easy to read and flowed well, and it was super interesting. That's off to you.
That's very kind of you. I mean, that's the chore, right? Taking all these facts and making them a readable narrative that someone's actually going to want to spend 343 pages with me. And so that means a lot to me. Thank you.
And I think, we would recommend the book to people who are interested in our sport in terms of understanding what goes on in the background and maybe taking their own personal mission to deal with that in a way that they see fit.
And also just seeing that it's not just glory to be an elite athlete. They deal with a lot, and I guess this is just one aspect, but the whole needing to perform, it's a little bit always there, even if you are not a Nike athlete. Like, you're still expected, if that's your job, to be good at it.
That's good. Yeah, Kara was clear on that during our interviews. Like, if you looked at just the marketing that Nike put out around her or the cover of the magazine she was on, you'd think this was the ideal life. But the rigors of being on Nike and all the training and all the treatment and all the considerations to this supplement or that supplement, and the pressures of performing all the time. Yeah, I mean, running in a snowstorm in the hallways of the corporate offices because the track is too covered in ice. There's no day off.
Yeah.
You don't have to stay home with your baby. You go to work. That was a revelation to me too, and really looking into the top athletes. Like, it's a job. I mean, this is a serious job.
And being away, the travel,
Yeah.
did mention the travel. And then at one point they had this special house that they were all living in that was like altitude. So it was like just simulating altitude.
Exhausting.
Yeah.
So thanks once again for the book, Matt. If people want to find out more about you or the book, or contact you on social media, do you have?
Yeah, it's themathart.com, and that's the handle for all my social media too. I'm trying to do less Twitter, but I'm on Instagram. That's my preferred social media.
And you'll be getting plenty of traffic once this book breaks, and it's due out in October, and may in fact be out by the time this hits the airwaves.
Okay.
We'll be very, very near to the timings on that.
And do you have a preferred place where you want people to get the book? Like, we always say, get it at your local bookstore, and then we leave a link also in the show notes.
Yeah, support your local bookstore. I mean, online, bookshop.org is preferred. They actually give money back to local bookstores. You tell it what local bookstore you go to, they affiliate your purchase, and then they pay them directly.
Oh, that's excellent.
It's a really neat nonprofit that came out about a year ago. So yeah, if you're buying it online, bookshop.org is the spot to go.
Great. Okay, so thanks for listening to another episode of Running Book Reviews. We should give a big thanks to Harper Collins for providing us with review copies of the book well ahead of its publication date. We thank them very much for their confidence in us with the book ahead of time, and also for putting us in touch with you, Matt. And a big thanks to you for spending a good amount of time with us today discussing some of the issues which are quite fascinating and are very insightful.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the interest and the opportunity. It's been great.
If you'd like to leave us any feedback on our podcast, or you want to suggest books that you'd like us to review in future episodes, you can find us on our social media contacts. Basically everywhere we're running book reviews, except for Twitter, where we are reviews_running. Please try and follow us, find out about new episodes, follow our back numbers, and just subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. Okay, look forward to speaking with you next time on Running Book Reviews. Bye for now.